It takes less than half an hour. That's the entire span. In roughly the time it takes to boil a kettle, 2,000 British soldiers, men who had fought Napoleon across Spain, Portugal, and France, are cut down on a muddy field outside New Orleans. Their opponents lose 71. Some records put it as low as 13. This isn't a raid or an ambush in some forgotten corner of the map. It's a full frontal assault by one of the most disciplined armies on earth, and it ends in total ruin. By late 1814, the War of 1812 has become a slog neither side can win, and neither can afford to lose. The British have already torched Washington, burning the Capitol and the White House to blackened shells, and now they are coming for New Orleans, the gateway to the Mississippi and the artery feeding the American interior. Hold New Orleans, and you hold the spine of the continent. The man standing in their way commands an army held together by stubbornness and necessity. What happened in the final minutes of that morning, the sight that met the American defenders once the smoke cleared, has mostly slipped out of popular memory. The slaughter was so total that one witness mistook the carpet of red uniforms for an actual sea of blood. But the real horror isn't the body count. It's how those men died, marching in tight formation into a corridor with no way out, watching their general shot off his horse, watching his replacement fall minutes later, and still advancing because no one had given an order to stop. To understand how this turned into a massacre, you need the lead-up. The war had dragged on for over 2 years across the Canadian frontier, the Great Lakes, and the open ocean, without a decisive blow from either side. American dreams of conquering Canada had collapsed in failed invasions, and British hopes of choking off American trade had stalled into a costly side conflict, while the real war against Napoleon drained their treasury. Baltimore had held, barely, behind the guns of Fort McHenry, in the fight that gave America its anthem. Both sides were now negotiating peace in Ghent, while soldiers kept dying an ocean away, with no one certain when or if a treaty would arrive. In the meantime, British commanders devised an ambitious scheme: send a large force to take New Orleans, seize the Mississippi, and cut the American West off from the east. A captured city would be either a bargaining chip at the peace table, or, if talks collapsed, a permanent stranglehold on the continent's most valuable river. Andrew Jackson reached New Orleans in December 1814, hollowed out by dysentery but burning with an intensity that rattled his own officers. He declared martial law almost immediately, a move legally shaky but tactically shrewd, conscripting civilians and forging the city's mixed population into a fighting force through pure will. What Jackson assembled looked, on paper, like a punchline: regulars, militia, pirates, and frontiersmen thrown together in a swamp. Yet discipline, urgency, and a brutally simple defensive plan welded them into something that actually functioned. There were U.S. Army regulars, few but well-drilled. Tennessee and Kentucky militiamen formed the corps, frontier hunters, who could reload a long rifle from behind a stump and put a ball through a playing card at 100 paces. Free black soldiers from New Orleans fought in their own units for a country that offered them barely a sliver of citizenship. Choctaw warriors joined the line, as did Creole gentlemen from the city's old French families. And then there were Jean Lafitte's Barratarian pirates, smugglers who knew every channel and bayou in the Delta and who traded their gunpowder, flints, and manpower for pardons. Jackson took everything offered. His tactical masterstroke was the ground itself. He picked a narrow strip along the Rodriguez Canal, about a mile across, hemmed in by the Mississippi on one side and an impassable cypress swamp on the other. There was no way around it. Any attacker had to come straight on, funneled into a corridor with no flanks to turn. Jackson had the canal deepened into a ditch, the excavated earth piled into a rampart behind it. Hundreds of cotton bales, requisitioned from nearby plantations, were stacked along the top to soak up musket fire, and firing platforms let multiple ranks of riflemen shoot in rotating volleys, with artillery spaced along the line to sweep the open ground ahead. It wasn't really a battlefield. It was a shooting gallery, and the British were walking straight into it. The British Expeditionary Force totaled roughly 8,000 men, though the main assault on January 8 fell to about 3,000. Professional soldiers drilled in European linear tactics who had already broken some of Napoleon's finest in Spain. They carried muskets, bayonets, bundles of sugarcane fascines meant to fill the American ditch, and ladders meant to scale the rampart beyond it. Their commander, Major General Edward Pakenham, was the Duke of Wellington's brother-in-law, a decorated officer famous for leading bayonet charges, brave to the point of recklessness, and confident that British discipline could overcome any defender. His second, Major General Samuel Gibbs, would lead one of the two main columns. The corridor itself stretched roughly a mile at its widest, though soft marshy ground narrowed the usable path. Whichever route the British took, they faced several hundred yards of open ground with no cover at all, soft and waterlogged underfoot, with the American line waiting at the far end like a dam bristling with gun barrels. There was no dead ground to hide in. It was a kill zone in the purest sense, and at dawn on January 8, 1815, with fog clinging to the river, 3,000 men stepped into it. The plan needed tight coordination. One column under Gibbs would strike the strongest part of the line, a second would push along the riverbank, and a smaller force would cross the river to silence the American guns on the far shore. That flanking move never happened. The boats were delayed, the current ran stronger than expected, and there weren't enough vessels. Pakenham knew this before dawn and faced a brutal choice: wait, or attack now and trust momentum to carry the line. Surprise was already lost. The American line stood fully manned and ready. He chose to attack. As fog lifted, the British advanced in tight ranks, bayonets fixed, drums beating, exactly as in Spain. Nothing had prepared them for what waited. The Americans held fire until the column closed to under 100 yards, then the whole line erupted at once. Grape shot tore gaps through the packed ranks, and rifles followed with a precision the British had never met. Fire so dense even missed shots found the man behind the target. Worse, the soldiers carrying fascines and ladders had been separated from the column in the smoke, so survivors reaching the ditch found a wall with no way up. Pakenham rode forward to rally them, was unhorsed, mounted again, and was struck down for good soon after. Gibbs, trying to seize command, fell within minutes of taking it. The assault was now an army without a head, fragmenting into pockets that pressed forward on pure momentum, froze in place, or drifted back through a field nearly as lethal in retreat as in advance. One last desperate charge by Highland troops, bagpipes wailing through the gunfire, pushed further than any other unit before it too was cut down. Command fell to Major General John Lafitte, who finally ordered the survivors to pull back. When the smoke cleared, roughly 2,000 British soldiers lay killed, wounded, or captured, including all 3 senior officers on the field. American losses numbered around 71, some accounts say as few as 13, a ratio near 28 to 1. A Kentucky soldier later described the field as looking like a sea of blood that, on closer look, turned out to be nothing but red coats covering the ground. Pakenham's body went home preserved in a barrel of rum, since there was no faster way to carry a dead general across the Atlantic. The bitter irony surfaced weeks later. The treaty ending the war had been signed in Ghent on December 24, 1814, 2 weeks before a shot was fired at New Orleans. The battle changed nothing on paper. It changed everything else. A war remembered for humiliation, and a burned capital was reframed overnight as triumph. And Andrew Jackson, the fevered general who held that line with pirates and frontiersmen, became the most famous man in the country, his path to the presidency starting on that rampart. Britain filed the defeat away as a colonial misstep, soon eclipsed by Waterloo. But for the families of those 2,000 dead, men who never came home from a field they'd never heard of, it was never a footnote at all.